Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, what are we doing? We're learning, like always, usually. My name is Connor. If you're new, the original link to the video top of the description. How did they teach the American Revolution in Britain? I don't think it's as big of a topic to other countries, even Britain, the person who we got our independence from, as Americans would like to think. I think it was it'd probably take up maybe a chapter in a British history book. I mean, they're losing a colony, probably a pretty significant one. But weren't there more profitable colonies in the Caribbean rather than the 13 colonies in the U.S.? Also, when it comes to just more relevant revolutions in the late 1700s, I think the French Revolution is much more significant, especially talking about significance to European countries. So I'd assume that's means it's probably not that heavy of a subject, if talked about at all.
An
So
on-demand
let's get
video
started.
learning service, learning your own pace with no tests and no schedules. Check out the Great Courses Plus through the link in the description below. More about them a little later. The American Revolution is one of the historical events that, together with things like the French Revolution, among other things, helped usher in the modern era. The Americans, on the whole, tend to be proud of this event and focus on it heavily in their school curriculum, as it heralds the birth of their nation and the triumph of a handful of terrorists against their government and fellow countrymen. But what do schools in Britain have to say about the American Revolution? To begin with, on the surface, if one talks to people on the street or reads a British book on the subject, Americans will perhaps be positively surprised to see that today there are no hard feelings in England regarding the Americans' choice to leave the glorious British Empire. May it reign forever. But really, we don't care. It seems like a peachy divorce with no grudges held or hostile views taken.
Well, you guys have burnt down the White House
After all, for the last
and
century
the
at least, the
Capitol
UK
building.
has been the no
Which
grudges
how
held
did we even allow you to do that?
or hostile
I gotta say it. The ease. Just let's go.
ever. But really, we don't care. It seems like a peachy divorce with no grudges held or hostile views taken. After all, for the last century at least, the UK has been the closest ally of the US in Europe, with mutual support in all major conflicts of the 20th century, and both follow similar policies so consistently that the UK has, on occasion, been ironically referred to as the 52nd state. But there is a catch. While the American Revolution is a cornerstone of
52nd state.
American history. But there is a catch. While the American Revolution is a cornerstone of American history, in Britain, well, it seems that the subject of the American War of Independence, as it is known in the UK, is rarely mentioned in British education books of past and present, or at least not in any great detail. That's not to say it's not mentioned anywhere, simply that while they may learn a little about early American history, including the War of Independence, it's more of a footnote in British history. It's probably also worth mentioning that when it is mentioned, it is never seen from a nationalistic point of view. For example, we don't angrily shake our fists at a picture of Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Rather, it's covered frankly, and then we move on swiftly to more interesting and relevant subjects to British history.
I think that a lot of Americans assume, because of how important, whether you like America or not, how significant America is to a lot of countries around the world, just as a lot of countries around the world are significant to the U.S., that we imagine, well, our founding must be a significant topic in British history or something. But that's ignoring the fact that we weren't that big of a deal when we were a very early nation, and it was colonists uprising, and I'm sure it wasn't preferable for the British at the time, but not exactly something that would take up a whole semester of
For example,
talking.
the focus in history
Boudica?
more interesting and relevant subjects to British history. For example, the focus in history is much more centered around things like the Roman times, for example, the legendary resistance of Queen Boudicca against the might of Rome, or later periods such as the 100 Years' War and the intrigues of the Tudors, generally trying to keep track of all the beheadings in the Tower of London. In more modern times, emphasis is put on issues such as industrialization, colonialism, and the post-colonization era, as well as the events during the World Wars and internal reforms. As to the aggression of the British Empire, while many certainly complain that it's not fully represented, it is far from omitted. British imperialism, for example, in Africa, is of course addressed. So why not focus on the American War of Independence and the birth of one of the most influential nations in modern history? It seems that the lack of details when teaching about American independence is not due to shame, envy, or part of a continuous effort to hide the UK's colonial past, as, say, the case might be in Japan. Rather, the main reason is the unspectacularly trivial fact that the American Revolution is seen as a minor detail in comparison to other events directly related to British history. The US breaking off was simply just one of many nations that did it for a whole lot of reasons. Indeed, if one looks at the larger scope, more than 60 countries celebrate independence from the British Empire, which in its heyday had control over 1/5 of the globe's population. That would amount to, on average, one Independence Day celebration of a country every week in a given school year. A phlegmatic English answer would be to say that we have better things to focus on than every country's Independence Day. So, the American Revolution is equated with other similar events, and it is rather addressed as an armed uprising of an important but distant rural populace against taxes, so hardly unique in history. The importance of ideas such as enlightenment, freedom, and democratic values are viewed by Americans on the basis of their
The hell is that? Is that a dunce cap or a...
revolution as one freedom and democratic values are viewed by Americans on the basis of their revolution as one prime example thereof. But the schools in the UK, similar to most European countries, focus on other incidents. Some of them are closer to home and widely acknowledged as shaping history, such as the French Revolution. Another example is the post-colonialism era in Asia and Africa as one of the main facets of world history. These, rather than American independence, are considered to provide the historical depth necessary for such discussions in the UK classrooms. Thus, the War of American Independence will most likely come up as an addendum, providing context when dealing with the French Revolution or with trade regulations within the British Empire as an example of a taxation policy gone wrong. It can also be related to the long-term effects of the 7 Years' War, which may be considered one of the causes that would eventually lead to the higher taxation that in turn ignited the revolutionary actions in the Americas. Of course, that does not mean that American history is shunned from British schools. Far from it. The developments of civic rights, the role of American industrialization, and the combined efforts with the British in the World Wars and the Cold War are placed highly in various stages of the curriculum, be it in the early key stages of the English system or adapted for older students of 15 to 18 years, such as during the A-level and GCSE exams. To give an example within the history books provided by AQA, that's a blast from the past. Out of more than 30 titles covering the period from the Crusades up to the 21st century, two refer directly to the USA. The Making of a Superpower, USA, 1865 to 1975, and The American Dream, Reality and Illusion, 1945 to 1980. The titles are indicative of the thematic stressed in each book. Notice that there is no book specifically dealing with the USA before 1861.
I'm sure that, American, the British American colonies and what happened leading up to the 7 Years' War, right, with stuff that happened in North America, might be more talked about or more significant in talking about than, say, what happened in the American Revolution. Just because of the scope of how it affects Britain. And I would say that I can say for the U.S. and probably for other countries that the younger you are, the lower grades that you're in, you tend to learn about more broad subjects and subjects that pertain to your country that you live in. And then I think kind of more broad world history stuff. If something is really super significant, then, maybe that's covered in a lot. Like the French Revolution, I remember being covered in probably middle school, definitely in high school. But I think as you get older, you're more likely to go into some topics, maybe like the American Revolution in Britain, learning about this for more, like you said, like an AP class or more advanced class where, you're trying to focus in on one subject.
Besides these reasons, the lack of emphasis on the American Revolution could be seen as related to the political scene within the UK itself. The UK is regarded by some as a fragile nation, as emphasized by much talk of independence by individual regions, especially in the last decade. The independence of a mainly English-speaking American colony, which is also culturally related to England, is much more on par with the Scottish or North Irish independence movements than, say, the Indian independence of 1947. But to sum up, in general, the American Revolution is not negatively portrayed in British schools, as some might first assume. Rather, it is seen as one of many world history events which are linked to the understanding and teaching of UK history without being particularly vital to it, and thus not really worth covering in depth. And I'll just add on a personal note here that when we started doing this series of how is so-and-so taught in another part of the world, someone asked me this on Twitter, and my response is just, it's just not taught. We don't really look at it. And, well, now you've had the more in-depth answer. And you know what else is worth covering in depth?
Guys, sponsor if you're interested. Make sure, and you learned it here, make sure to use their promo codes and everything. Oh my God, what was I going to say?
Literally
I need to just say the things.
It. And, well, now you've had the more in-depth response series of how is so-and-so taught in an without being...
Oh, right. I think Americans tend to, like I said, I'm sure most countries, when they're teaching their younger students, I'm sure they focus on, the history of the country they live in and more broad topics. But I think that is probably even more the case in the U.S. You guys would have to tell me if that's incorrect or not in the comments. And so a lot of Americans just assume, like, how could they not learn about the beginning of world history, which was in 1776? I'm exaggerating a bit. I hope no one truly thinks that. But I think it's just kind of a reality check, slap in the face that a lot of Americans get, that you're not the center of the world today. And although you were a very significant part of the world today, it wasn't always the case, certainly not in the late 1700s and early 1800s. And I think Americans just are unaware of that. And until they... I'm sure this is a big, like, oh, that's a good point moment when a lot of Americans hear something like this and how their history, even to the Brits, isn't that important, especially the further back you go to the beginning. So,
well, now you've had the more in-depth of the Great Courses Plus, which is an on-demand library of wonderful courses that help you get all kinds of wicked smart, like those rabble-rousing colonial Americans. No, really, we don't mind. If you're enjoying this video, I think you'll really enjoy their course on the age of Benjamin Franklin. Or if you want to zoom out a little bit, maybe check out their broader course, A History of the United States, 2nd edition. That one's absolutely massive. It's an
I really don't know that much about Benjamin
American
Franklin.
history, and those 84
Definitely not as
plus
much
is
as I'd
like
like
half
to.
an hour each, so that's not a joke. Basically, the Great Courses Plus is like a university education, but it's at your own pace. No tests, no schedules, and it's incredibly easy to access. PC, tablet, phone. They've also got audio streaming, very convenient, so you can learn and listen, or listen and learn, on the move. There are thousands of lectures to choose from, so it's great stuff. Try it out for free at thegreatcoursesplus.com/brainfood.
Use the /brainfood,
click the
guys.
link in the description below, and
I don't know if
let's
you can
get into
see.
today's
Thumbs
bonus
up.
facts. Ever wonder what the difference between the UK, England, and Great Britain is? Honestly, yes, sometimes, even as a British man. The actual name...
England is obviously just England, the country, not Wales, not Scotland, not Northern Ireland, just England. Great Britain is, I think, Scotland, Wales, and England, and doesn't include Northern Ireland, and the United Kingdom is all four, I think.
Name of the sovereign
And then the
state
British
we're talking
Isles
about
are-
here is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the UK. The United Kingdom is made up of the countries England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The confusion of the terms seems to revolve around the term country and the political powers that are perceived based on that word. While the four countries that make up the UK are generally considered separate in the minds of locals, and in certain sporting events, their powers for local law and control are devolved from the UK. Think of the 50 states of the United States. While each state has their own set of laws, they are all under the power of the federal government. In the case of the UK, it is somewhat similar, though certain responsibilities are also implied, like healthcare and education, that are delegated to 3 of the 4 countries. The responsibilities that are delegated differ from one country to the next. England is the only country in which the UK does not devolve any powers, and instead it is legislated directly by the UK government. When it comes to
some people in Cornwall also say they're like in a different country, or is that just a strong identity?
Nation of the UK that is recognized, and not any of the 4 constituent countries.
Sorry.
Directly by the UK government. When it comes to international politics, it is the sovereign nation of the UK that is recognized, and not any of the 4 constituent countries. The term Great Britain refers to the landmass that comprises England, Scotland, and Wales. Something that aids in the confusion as to the difference between Great Britain and the UK is that the term is sometimes internationally used as a synonym for the UK. For instance, the UK's Olympic team competes under the name Great Britain, and the ISO, International Organization for Standardization, gives the UK the country codes of GB and GBR. This can be confusing given that the ISO also codes England, Scotland, and Wales as subdivision countries of the UK, but Northern Ireland as a subdivision province. If you're getting the impression that Northern Ireland is the red-headed stepchild of the UK, you may be right, both figuratively and literally, we suppose. The confusion over the definition of these 4 countries in reference to the UK is further muddied up in sporting competitions. There are several international sporting events like the Commonwealth Games and football competitions in which each of the 4 has their own team, and they do not compete under a unified national team. When competing under these conditions, their nations are referred to as home nations. Because each team is from a specific home country, it can lead some to think that these countries have political autonomy as well. If you're curious about when these unions between the countries that comprise the UK came about, it happened as follows. England and Wales were joined in 1536. Scotland and England were joined together in 1707, along with the previously joined Wales, to officially form the Kingdom of Great Britain. Ireland decided to join up in 1801, at which point the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was formed. In 1922, however, many of the southern counties of Ireland decided to remove themselves from the Union, and the UK changed their name to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, in summary, Great Britain is England, Scotland, and Wales. The UK is England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and the full name is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. England is just the part of the island that is England. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, check out our great sponsor, the Great...
It took a long time for me to get confident with it.
Courses Plus, link below, and thank you for watching.
Yeah, again, maybe it was a shock a little bit the first time. I realized it's not that big of a deal to other places, but once you think about it a little bit, it makes a lot of sense. You know, just the American Revolution is not the start of history, all right? It is the beginning of a very important country today, and for the past, 100 years, very important country. But, again, history is long, and we are still sort of the new kids on the block. No shock. Love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below, any answers to any of the questions I had. You guys are awesome with that, or anything else. Would appreciate it. All right, guys. Hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye.